Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Ryan, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Great Tech Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is Ryan Gilliam. He's the co-founder and CEO of Forterra, a low-carbon cement manufacturer focused on paving the way to zero CO2 cement. Ryan is a serial entrepreneur who has dedicated his career to solving climate issues. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. Been looking forward to it.
Yeah, so would love to get the conversation going with how you made your way into this industry.
Yeah, it's probably was just the kind of perfect timing. But when I was going through undergrad, I had a professor that was in the hydrogen space, in kind of clean energy space, that was very inspiring, and so ended up doing my PhD in materials engineering under him, and that kind of gave me the whole intro into the climate sustainability world, if you will. And it was right at the time also when An Inconvenient Truth came out, and there was this big push around climate, and I think so just that all together really got me hooked on the space, and almost 20 years now into it.
Yeah. When did the cement angle come into it? So you talked about your passion for the kind of sustainability aspect of it, but really zeroing in on cement, when that come about?
It actually almost all the way from the beginning. So after my PhD, admittedly, I was planning to go the academic route and continue on into the academic space, and got a call from a company, Calera, out of Silicon Valley. And Calera was really one of the first CO2 to cement products companies during Climate Tech 1.0. And I say I'll save you the long story, but was convinced enough to make the move instead of through the academic world out to the industrial world with Calera. I thought I'd give it a shot for a year, and now we're sitting 18 years later. And that company that I came and joined as a scientist in the company. I actually eventually took over as the CEO and pivoted into some other areas that some other technology areas that we went into. But that actually is really what formed the basis of Forterra, was that original company I joined all those years ago.
That's really cool. What are some lessons learned then from those early days? I'm sure there were some startup challenges that for sure have popped up. What do you think are some of the most valuable takeaways for other innovators?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard. Definitely don't have enough time to go through all the lessons learned from that company. What I would say, Calera was an incredible company. We had, I think at one point 150 people, but the number of just researchers and engineers and just brilliant people in the company that I got a chance to work with was inspiring. And we created this new type of cement that was 44% by weight captured CO2. It's actually the same basis of the technology that Forterra uses. The fundamental challenge, though, is I think when I first joined and as a tech love, as a lover of technology, I made the mistake, and I think frankly, Calera made the mistake. I think a lot of Climate Tech 1.0 and even now Climate Tech 2.0 made the mistake in that there's a view generally that if you have a really cool technology or a differentiated technology, that's going to be successful and drive adoption and make a successful company. And again, as a PhD tech person who's developed, a number of technologies over the years, 100 plus patents, I always, used to look at every new technology from that perspective. But the reality is you can have a great technology, but unless you have a clear market for it, clear economic advantage, clear ability to scale it, and fit in the existing markets, that technology will just eventually sit on a shelf. And I think that it was not an epiphany because it wasn't an overnight thing, but I think the biggest lesson learned was if you don't from day one take just as much focus on customer and economics as you do on technology, you're not going to be successful in getting to commercial production, which is really, again, in sustainability, that's the whole goal, is to get to commercial production, is get to global rollout and having a meaningful impact on CO2.
Yeah. It's interesting because you hit on a great point there, but here in construction and in the cement industry as well, there's another kind of layer of complication to that, in that it's a very risk-averse industry. Yeah. It's been doing the same thing that for decades and centuries even, and it's worked. So why change it up? So you're running into that headwind. How have you kind of gone at that?
Yeah, and we should say, it's risk-averse for good reason, right?
Sure.
It's you're putting into buildings and bridges and everything else, and so cement being the glue in concrete really is what creates our civilization. So obviously super important to get that right. And really, when you look at buildings, the actual amount of cost in the cement is fairly low relative to the building cost. So putting that at risk with a new material is a big leap for people to make.
Mhm.
So I think we've come at it a few different ways. One way in particular that is the benefit of the fact that we started this technology, started this product back in the Calera days, is that we now have our material out there for 15 plus years in real world applications. We did some office buildings, some sidewalks, other types of public infrastructure type things. And so people now have been able to go back and look at that material, see that it stood up to the test of time, which I think helps just overall in our story about bringing something new. But I think the bigger thing really, frankly, is it's a risk-averse industry for good reason when they don't know what it is you're proposing to bring to the table and what the product is. And so we've spent a lot of time, and it's one of our core values with the company to focus on customers, but we spend a lot of time at the regulatory groups, showing our data, explaining what we do, working with cement and concrete professionals so that they understand what it is that we're making, how it works both as a blend and as a pure product. And so I think we've done the right steps to build that credibility so people understand why what we're making works, why it's actually complementary to the current cement being produced, and why people are getting comfortable in using it in buildings.
Yeah, interesting. So let's back up for a second. For listeners who may not know, why is cement such a critical climate problem? And what are some approaches to tackle it differently than some of those more traditional methods, let's say?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe just to set the basis. So cement is the gluing concrete, and concrete's the second most consumed thing on Earth behind water. So just a massive industries, 30 plus billion tons a year, and about 3.5-4 billion tons of CO2 emissions from that industry a year, almost all tied back to that cement production. And so that's, different figures are out there, but roughly 8% of the world's CO2 emissions comes from cement concrete production. So fairly significant impact from a CO2 perspective. And it's one of those hard to abate sectors.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why cement's so CO2 intensive is for two reasons. One is the main feedstock that goes into making cement is limestone. Limestone is 44% by weight solid CO2 in that mineral. And when you put it through a kiln and heat it up, you lose that CO2 to emissions. And that's about 60% of the emissions in the cement space. The other 40% comes from the fuel you need to heat up that kiln to make cement. And so one, that's why it's so CO2 intensive, but it's also frankly why, or it's what gives the basis for how we've formed our company and the approach that we've taken. And again, this approach comes all the way from the Calera days. But if you look at how nature forms its building blocks, so coral reefs and shells, the exact opposite happens. You actually absorb CO2, make a reactive form of limestone that actually has cementing properties. So what we did at Forterra was really figured out how to take what nature does and do it in an industrial scale. So I always say it's a little bit comically, we basically take limestone, which is the same feedstock that goes into cement, and we turn it back into limestone, but we go from a form of limestone that's just an inert rock to a form that's actually a cementing product.
Yeah. That's really cool. So literally capturing the CO2 into the cement. How'd you take that from idea to really bring it into reality there?
Yeah, long journey. And again, it starts from that original company, that I joined when I first came out of grad school. And the idea really is we, after you take limestone and put it through a kiln, you make lime and CO2. It was all about figuring out how do we take that lime and then use it as effectively the capture source to capture that CO2 and react it again. And so as with any technology concept, it started with a bunch of lab testing, concepts, went through many years of development to try and figure that out before we finally piloted the technology, then went through multiple years of piloting it, then built a larger pilot, really a demo plant, went through multiple years of that. And with each case, this kind of gets to that beginning part I talked about where it's not just about technology to be successful. You have to have the economics and scalability. And so with each of those subsequent kind of scale ups that we did, it really was focused on how do we reduce costs? How do we simplify it? How do we make sure that we're using pieces of equipment that are known and scalable, that are cost effective, materials of construction that are cost effective. So it really is a long journey to go through all those steps to prove that out. And then when we started Forterra, so that company shut down the CO2 cement business 2014, 2015.
Okay.
Started Forterra in 2019. And fundamentally, it's the same core product technology concept, but from that viewpoint of if we don't make the economics work and don't make it scalable, it's not going to have an impact. And so what we figured out really was instead of competing with the the cement world, we took the opposite approach and said, if we actually work with the cement world, use their feedstocks, use their infrastructure, use all their logistics and sales, blend our material in with theirs, we could then really roll out that same technology we'd already piloted and proven out, but in a way that was actually economically competitive with traditional cement without needing a green premium to make it work. And so that's really the long evolution of going from concept to 18 years later, having built our first, small commercial plant, putting a significant amount of material into real world projects now. But there's a long pathway there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting too. Thanks for going into the evolution of the competitive mindset to the cooperating mindset of that. I think it's really interesting. Over the last couple of years, when you switched to, instead of coming in as the disruptor, but coming in as the complementer, if you will, how has that kind of perception switched in how people are looking at the technology itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that have changed since the original company now. So there is that change in thesis to actually work alongside the big cement companies and lime companies and big incumbents. Obviously helps with them seeing how there's a business structure that could work here. But frankly, for us, it's obvious, but I think, generally a lot of new technologies view it as, if you work with these big companies, they're not entrepreneurial, they're risk averse. So it's not the way to bring a new technology to market. And I think it's just the wrong approach from the perspective of what these big companies know is how to scale, how to drive down capital costs, how to drive down operating costs, how to get product to market. And so it's really more of a recognition of leveraging what they do really well. And in doing that, that's what allows the economics to work. And I think, so approaching the cement world from that perspective of why it's complementary to what they do, why it allows them to make more product, to reduce CO2 per ton coming out of their plants, make more money in doing it. I think that's what's resonated well, because they're still using their feedstocks, their plants. We're just bolting on beside them, adding our technology, and really giving them optionality to put products to market that have, are better from a sustainability standpoint, and they're still making money doing it.
Yeah, that's cool. So when you're talking about bolting on, what's that process look like? What's kind of the ramp up time and the implementation of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is another one of those. We were talking about at the very beginning about the learning curves that we went through in the original company. I always say when people develop technology, especially when you love technology, there's a comfort in complexity where the more integration you do, the more things you do to try and drive down costs. Or I think like these are kind of, makes it sexy, makes it interesting, fun to work on. But the reality is, if you're partnering with a cement company, they already have put their capital in. They're producing 1,000+ tons of material a day, multiple thousand tons of material a day that they're putting to market. So anything that's going to shut down their plant and hurt their customer base, hurt their distribution, everything else is almost a no-go. So we had to simplify. And when we say bolt on, we're effectively bolting on beside their plant. We're not requiring them to shut down or anything else to put our technology in place. And, at some point when they're doing a regular maintenance or downturn, we will just tap into the side of the kiln so that we can pull the CO2 over to our plant and start using that CO2 in making our product. And so it really is bolt on in the sense that it is not impacting what they currently do. And that's, again, by design. There's lots of cool stuff we can do tech-wise to integrate that would be even more interesting and make our process even more efficient or energy efficient or economic. But the reality of that is getting a plant to shut down for an extended period of time for a build out is not going to happen.
Now, I think about it in the big innovation terms. A lot of people, the natural instinct is like, innovation is just totally groundbreaking and switching up the process 100%. But if you're not factoring the reality of the situation, it's not going to get implemented. So it's not really going to be that groundbreaking innovation because it's not going to take root. What you guys are doing is looking at that reality first, sounds like, and saying, how do we actually get this implemented? And, maybe that's baby steps. And, over the next couple of years, you can start building that out and doing other stuff. But I love what's the first thing that is going to get people to actually take action on this? What does that stuff need to be? And that's what sounds like you guys are doing.
Yeah. And I would say, really internally our view is we went from kind of comforting complexity to just simplicity. It's everything we look at, it's using off the shelf equipment that's already been scaled in other industries. If you were to show up at our plant that we built out in Redding, California, a lot of the equipment there is straight from the wastewater industry. So it is known equipment. It's already been scaled. It's already gone through that learning curve. we've done a lot to really reduce temperatures, pressures, things. So it's effectively, you'll see plastic piping and plastic tanks and things that are just all driven from that perspective of how do we reduce costs, simplify, make it easier to build these out, make it easier to integrate, and reduce, again, some of that. Yes, it's, again, as an innovator, I love when you, like, the cooler the technology can make, but sometimes saving that few extra percent of energy efficiency, or that really, if that's going to impact your ability to integrate or again, use known equipment, that's going to cost you more, it's not worth it. And that's a hard thing as an innovator to say, actually the best solution is one that works for the market, economics, and tech, not just on the tech.
So that brings up an interesting rabbit trail. Okay, so as I've said, you put that tech forward hat on first. How do you put in gut checks of, hey, that's a really cool piece of tech, but here's the reality of the situation, and have that balance between the tech forward and the practical reality?
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to the culture that you build in the company, and when you've got an engineering and science team that understand that's the ultimate goal, is to roll out the tech broadly, which means getting it cost effective and scalable. I think it makes it so that we all hold each other accountable. But admittedly, for me, effectively my secret weapon, or the secret weapon for Forterra, has always been my co-founder, Dr. Mike Weiss. We've done 10 plus technologies, 100 plus patents together. Brilliant chemical engineer, but grounded in economics. So anytime a new idea is brought up, my screening test is really having him look at it and saying, okay, cool concept, but will it actually scale and work economically? And if he gives the check mark, then we know we have something to dig deeper into.
Yeah, that's cool. Definitely need the balance there for sure.
Yeah.
So kind of broadening it out more, in your view, what are some of the key levers, whether that's policy, procurement, education, what have you, that need to be aligned for low carbon cement to move forward from more into the mainstream?
Yeah, I think there's a great societal pull where people are looking for more sustainable products, and that's helping overall in the industry, because if a ready mix can offer a mix design or a solution that's better from a sustainability standpoint, provided it's not going to add significant cost or frankly any cost to it, I think that will win out in the current landscape right now, or in the current markets. And so that's kind of the great foundation, is that means if you can provide something that's economically competitive, there's a clear path to getting it out to market. Now, what I will say is, obviously having regulatory or incentives or value on CO2 or tax incentives, all of those things obviously help with adoption. And that's the other piece that I think is really hard with bringing a new tech to market, is that the first plants always cost more. They're less efficient. You got to go through that learning curve before you get to really what they call nth plant pricing. And so that means, everyone wants to be then first to be second, right? Because those first plants aren't going to be nearly as economically beneficial. So to me, what the incentives really do, and the regulatory side really does, is it gives that extra economic boost, or that extra incentive for people to be early adopters, to get first in line. Because once you get through that learning curve, and then can show you get to nth plant economics, and you can effectively get to green for free, and you can roll out the tech broadly, there's going to be a lot of people in line to build plants. But it's those first adopters, that's the hard piece. And that's really what incentives did for wind and solar and electric vehicles, is it made it economically incentive enough for people to do the first adoption.
Yeah. How have you seen the evolution of the sustainability mindset when it comes to tech adoption over the 18, 20 years that you've been at the game?
It's changed a lot. I will say, before shutting down the original company's CO2 to cement business, spent a lot of time traveling, meeting with cement companies, trying to get people interested in the tech. And fundamentally, I would say, yes, there was issues with the tech at the time around economics. So there's good reasons why people weren't interested. But frankly, getting people willing to take the time, meet, test the material was not the easiest ever. People weren't necessarily geared toward looking at sustainability products. This go around, I would say, from an industry as a whole, from the cement companies through to ready mix companies, there's a very clear willingness to try new products, try new mix designs, come up with things that are more sustainable. And again, I think it's a little bit from that societal pull that's happening, where people want these products. But that has not been our issue of getting people interested in wanting to try the products.
Yeah. That's cool. Do you see different regions embracing it more, or is it pretty, ubiquitous at this point?
So we are talking effectively globally to companies. So I don't know if I would say that there's a fundamental difference in which regions are looking for sustainable solutions, But definitely as an industry as a whole in cement, it is still very different region to region from a regulatory side, from a price point of cement side. So for us, we're focusing on areas where there is a higher value on cement and there are incentives right now to, again, get to those first adopters. And then we would scale more broadly.
Yeah. Interesting. So put your future casting hat on here. Concrete, one of the most used substances, as you've already mentioned. What do you think the future of construction looks like in 10, 20 years down the line?
Yeah, so I think it's always going to be driven by economics at the end of the day. And, I think there will be pockets of kind of niche products that sell at green premiums that will obviously be adopted. But again, when you're talking the second most consumed thing on earth, these are huge markets, huge plants. So you need to just get the bulk of that material to the market, and being economically competitive with traditional cement is going to matter. So the way I would see it is that all SEM, supplementary cementitious materials that are cost effective, will be used in mixed design. So you're going to go to seeing higher and higher amounts of SEMs being used in traditional cement. And I think what you'll also see is really a move, I would like to believe, in some of the standards. Right now, the standards are compositional based standards for the most part in most states, which really means it's tied back to Portland cement. There's a push to go towards more performance based standards, so that as long as you're meeting the performance, you're not as tied to the composition of traditional Portland cement. And so I think you'll see a general drift or shift towards also performance-based standards being specified fairly broadly. For us, I mean, that's really how we've approached the market, is that we can use our product as a blend, so effectively as a supplementary cementitious material alongside traditional Portland cement under the existing regulations. But we can also go all the way to 100%, our product. And so when we go to 100% our product, I think there's trade-offs with Portland cement. We get to higher strength faster, but there's other areas where we would need to get people comfortable with using our material. And so I'd also like to believe that you're going to see, especially in a 10-year horizon, that there'll be materials like our 100% product being used in applications, because that really gives you a pathway all the way to a zero CO2 cement.
Yeah, very cool. Is there a particular myth that you think people are buying into around cement that just isn't true, that's maybe a hindrance in the adoption?
I mean, I think it just purely comes down to risk versus economics. And so if you're going to take on new risk and you have to pay a premium to do that, it's pretty hard to get people to make that leap. And again, that's why I think you'll see it in small niche applications. But realistically, if you want to make the economics work in cement, you have to get to multi-100,000 ton a year plants to million tons a year plants. Okay, so you're well beyond a few thousand tons here or there to partners. You have to just get bulk sales in place. And so that to me takes you out of the green premium world. And so at that point, then for them to take on new risk, they got to be confident that they can sell your product and that customers are going to use it. It's not going to put any issues with the construction projects. And so again, it's just that risk economic trade-off has to be right.
Makes sense. So as we kind of zero in on towards the end of the conversation, want to focus in more on the innovation side of things. So, we talked a lot about your earlier days and bringing innovative products to market, but is there a particular piece of advice that you would give other innovators trying to drive sustainability into industries that are in the risk-averse zone?
Yeah, I've kind of touched on this a bunch during this call about really technology has to be married up with economics, but I just think it's being honest with yourself about where you're really at. And, I've worked on the venture capital side for a while as well, and see a lot of technologies pitch that require orders of magnitude improvements on certain technical aspects from the lab or from piloting to make the economics make sense. And that's not a reason not to do it, especially if you have a clear pathway of why you think you can achieve those. But it's just internally, you have to be honest with yourself about where's your data actually at? What's realistic in terms of where you can get that data to get to? What is that going to mean in economics, and what is that going to mean in scalability? And I will say, like, one of the hardest parts I have from an innovation side, even internally still within Forterra, is we have a bunch of brilliant scientists and engineers here, right? So we have ideas all the time that are interesting ideas that the tech person in me says, yeah, let's put time, effort, let's start going after this. But again, being diligent in that, really stress testing it, understanding is there a clear pathway, and deciding should it get resources or not. That's the hard part, because saying no as a tech person to cool tech ideas does not come natural and does not come naturally. You should try and keep your team and make sure your team keeps each other intellectually honest on where you actually at. Are you pursuing something because it has a clear path for scalability and making an impact or not? And it doesn't mean that those aren't cool things to pursue, but maybe those are more pursued in the fundamental worlds and academic worlds than it is in the industrial and scale up space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. So a couple of kind of rapid fire questions for you. What is the phrase modeling the future? What does that mean and look like to you?
It's an interesting phrase. Look, I think for us, again, that thesis of how we've looked at the world, if we can stay true to that thesis, we can bring technology to the market. And it's not even just for Terra. It's broadly, if you look at all these hard to abate sectors and what's happening in sustainability. But if you really follow that thesis and bring stuff that's truly scalable and economic, we should be able to have a meaningful impact across all these hard to abate sectors and really have an impact on sustainability.
What does innovation mean to you?
Yeah, interesting. I probably 15, 20 years ago, coming out of my PhD, innovation was just cool new concepts and really digging into the science and trying to understand it all. I think innovation to me now is economically driven concepts and taking those through scale.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. So how do people find out more information and connect with you?
Yeah. So, we've had quite a bit of press come out as of late. We've signed our first partnership, and we're for global partnership for building out commercial plants. So that means a few things are coming up. You'll see more of these announcements as we start building out these first plants. So if you're on the consumer side and actually looking for green cement products, obviously happy to connect through us through our website at forterrausa.com or forterraglobal.com. And so that's from on the customer side. Obviously on the investor side, kind of similarly, there's we're in that phase now building out commercial plants. So we're going to continue to scale, continue to need project finance, continue financing to build out this commercial pipeline. So obviously more there. And then from for those that are on the consumer side, the pull side, the general public that wants green building materials, just anytime you're doing something, keep telling your contractors or architects or others that that's what you're looking for to help keep making sure that pull's there.
Yeah. Nice. Well, final question for you. If I could give you all construction power, Ryan, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry. What would you pick to innovate?
Oh, wow. Cross all sustainability, cross cement.
Sure. Wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah. I think there are interesting, good technologies now that can have a meaningful impact and there's technologies like ours that are clear economic pathway to having a meaningful impact. They talk about with technologies, this valley of death of going from first of a kind to commercial rollout. And a lot of that, frankly, is driven by not just the tech itself, but is there the right financial mechanisms in place to actually bring these technology forward, whether it be project finance or infrastructure and growth groups? How do they get comfortable with risk? How do they get comfortable with off takes when that doesn't really exist in cement? So to me, I think the thing that I think needs to be solved is just what is that kind of base of funding that's there to allow companies that are at that stage of true commercial rollout to make that leap and make that happen. And I think, if we get that solved, I think you'll see a number of these hard to abate sectors will roll out technologies more broadly because it's just not an easy piece of the puzzle right now.
Yeah.
Or it's an unsolved piece of the puzzle.
Right. Yeah. No, makes sense. Very cool. Yeah. Ryan, thanks so much for taking the time and enjoying the conversation today.
For sure. Thanks so much for having me.
And now it's time for my Todd takes from this episode. First take, be honest about where you really are. True innovation starts with being brutally honest about your current reality. Don't oversell the data or the promise. Know exactly where you stand and what's realistically possible. Second take, grounded in reality beats cool tech. Shiny technology isn't enough. What actually gets adopted is what's practical, scalable, and simple to integrate. Sometimes the smartest move is choosing simplicity over complexity. And finally, economics drive scalability. Change doesn't scale because it's exciting. It scales because the economics work. For any new process or product to truly take off, it has to compete on cost as much as on performance. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you are interested in learning more information, you can visit our sponsor, Greatech Group, at ASTI.com for more information. You can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to check out our website, bridgingthegappod.com. As always, I'm Todd Ryan, thanking you for joining the conversation to model the future on the Bridging the Gap podcast. Keep innovating.